My name is Dr. Tekemia Dorsey. I am the CEO of the International Association of Black Triathletes. I'm the owner of IABT Multisport Racing. I am the head coach of IABT Junior Multisport Club. I am a radio podcast host of DTD's Urban Multisport Radio and Podcast, and I am the senior consultant at DTD's Urban Multisport Consulting. I come with almost 3 decades, actually 25 years in sports as an athlete, as a coach, rec, high school, community engagement, or community level. I've played every sport out there except lacrosse. I used to be a professional women's football player for the Baltimore Burn. I've had a consulting business where I used to help doctoral learners to become doctors with the Life Cycle Research Company. And I'm an award-winning and best-selling author, keynote international speaker. I am a published author of over 20 books and all of that great jazz, consultant and mom and I'm from an urban community, very, very much on the west side of Baltimore. So I'm excited about, how I've been able to just evolve in life. And I currently sit on the USAT Board of Directors for USA Triathlon.
You are one busy woman. I don't know how you do it all. That's a hell of a lot of stuff that you're doing. But you mentioned about the sports that you've done. You've played, you've done all the sports apart from playing lacrosse. You've even been a professional football player. I'd love to go back to your childhood. Was sports something that was part of your family? Was that encouraged when you were growing up? Or how did you get into sports?
I didn't play sports as a youth. I actually didn't find sports. Well, we have structured games, but I really didn't know what it being sport. Like we did kickball and things like that in the back alley. But I really wasn't introduced to sports until my sophomore year in high school. And then when I was in high school, I did play volleyball, basketball, track and field, softball when it wasn't track and field, which was very rare. It was like one season I did shot put and discus and really didn't like it. It was too thick to jump hurdles. And then when I got to college, I went through softball, but I was redshirted my freshman year because I didn't do well on the SATs. So I played softball throughout college, but because I wasn't able to play softball my freshman year, I started running. You typically have that freshman 15 that they talked about. I think I picked up like the freshman 30. And because diabetes and heart attacks and strokes and things had run in my family, when I first saw the first roll in my waist, all of these things started coming. And, because from a family standpoint, a lot of my family had died, or weren't doing well as a result. So I started running as a freshman in college, and not on a track and field, but just running leisurely because my weight had ballooned. And I'd never looked back. Went on to do over 300 endurance races. I'm part of the Marathon Maniacs, the National Black Marathoners Association, a Half Maniacs. My first endurance race was actually a marathon. I wasn't even familiar with half marathons or 10Ks or 5Ks. And before, all of a sudden, when people started counting races, all we did was run. Just run for the sake of that's what we enjoy doing. And so from there, the sky was just the limit. It just became a part of who I am and then went from there.
Did you always enjoy running, or is it something that you've grown to love?
I grew to love it. At first, I didn't like running because although I had this athletic background, running is a different animal. You like they talk about those transferable skills and skill sets from one part of your life to the other. And although I had athletic ability and endurance, or at least short endurance, I didn't have the mindset to run because it was tough. And here you kind of move away from group sports, like the volleyball and the softball and basketball, to running, which is completely you. So it was a whole new challenge. It was a whole new skill set. It was a whole new mindset. And so I had to really overcome Tekemia as opposed to anything else, right? I couldn't, if it didn't work, it was because of me. If it did work, it was because of me. So I kind of just backed it up from long-term goals to short-term, and then that's how I fell in love with running, by just overcoming short increments to get to being able to run distance.
Did you have much sort of support and encouragement around you when you were getting into your running, and especially as you started to do, more of the marathon type distances?
When I first started running on the campus of the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, no, because unless you ran track and field, who's running, right? Like, what are you running for? So, but no, I did not initially have that support because I was kind of creating something that was out of the norm, groundbreaking, if so to speak. However, it did inspire a whole lot of people as a result of that, because people would see me run like I was up at the crack of dawn. I was running at night. I remember the first time when I, ran on a track at UMES, and I would start out with like 2 miles and then build up to like 16 laps. And then I was like, okay, if I hit 20 laps, which is 5 miles, I can conquer what's called Backbone Road. And I remember being on the track, and at this point, other people started that weren't part of track and field started walking and running, and they were like literally counting, watching me run, and it became an inspiration to them. So that's when a support kind of came in, but it was more so inspiration for themselves, because they too had run into that for a variety of reasons, being overweight, or, needing to, want to get into that summer outfit or whatever the case might be. So at first, no, but gradually, yes.
When did you decide to transition into triathlon?
I actually stumbled across triathlons in 2013, and I actually started with my first endurance duathlon, which is a run bike run, versus a triathlon, which is swim cycle run. And I did a 70.3 duathlon, which didn't appear hard because I had already come from 20 plus years in running. All I had to do was train for 56 miles, and then a 5K. So it was a 5K, a 56-mile run, and then a 13.1-mile run after that, right? I mean, bike and then run. So once I completed it, which was really 73 miles, I was like, man, all I have to do is substitute the 5K for a swim. I can do that. So I signed up for Ironman Eagleman, which at that point I did not realize it was the toughest and hardest Ironman on the East Coast. I did not know how to swim. In December of 2013, I learned how to swim, and 9 months and 15 days later, I became an Ironman.
Tell me about learning how to swim. How was that journey for you?
Well, growing up, I didn't grow up around pools, but I did have access to one. So in our park pool, at a local pool in the park, how you have a lot of kids there, Sarah, and they want to fun and game and didn't know how to swim. So I remember a young man throwing me in the water deeper than I was tall, and then he helped me down. So that freaked me out, and I never vowed to get back in the water. So because I had this, fast forwarding into 2013, now that I had this goal in front of me, the one thing that I know about me is that I do it because it's a challenge for me, not because someone is telling me I can't do it. So I did hire a certified swim instructor. So I was in the pool at 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, 5-6 days a week. And I didn't take a break. And slowly but surely, just like, and I can equate this to when I first started running, I knew that I couldn't go out in a marathon distance. I had to break it down into small goals. So first and foremost, it was learning how to float, right? And then it was like keeping my head underwater. And then it was, floating from one side to the other, and then breathing. And then, by the end of January, I had swam my first 66 laps, which was a mile. So that was a little over 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks. And then coming at March, I had to transfer those indoor swim skill sets to open water, which Sarah was like starting all over again. So it was definitely, I could have quit. At some point I was just thinking like, what did I get myself into? But I knew it was something that I wanted to do, and quitting has never been an option for me. I don't grow up from privilege. I grew up from having to kind of set my mind on it and go for it. And this was just one of those things.
What do you think you learnt most about your experience of doing an Ironman that you've been able to apply into other areas of your life?
Actually, it's the flip. Other areas of my life helped me to understand that I could get through an Ironman. All I needed to do was get through the swim. I was already mentally tough. Was already goal oriented, was already a leader, had already overcome adversity, had already come naysayers, had already come people not believing. That's Ironman, right? So Ironman was nothing but another target. It's the previous experiences in life that helped me and knew that all I needed to do was put my best foot forward, create smart goals, achieve those goals, create more goals, achieve those goals, and keep going. Because my best and worst enemy was my mirrored image. So Ironman didn't teach me anything. My previous experience taught me what I needed to do when I showed up at the start line and every day during training to complete Ironman. And it's funny because I remember when I was training for Ironman Eagleman, and then all of a sudden I got this email, and that was the first year that Ironman Maryland was in Cambridge, right? It was the first inaugural Ironman Maryland that September. And, I remember signing up for it. And even when I started training for Ironman Eagleman, you would have all these people, Sarah, that were swimmers for years and on swim teams and, X, Y, and Z. And they didn't complete Ironman Eagleman and they didn't complete Ironman Maryland, right? And that's why I always say that you never judge a book by its color until you open the content of it and read until you explore the content. So what people didn't know about me was my previous history and aptitude of overcoming adversity and not swaying with the wind, which typically what happens in the sport of triathlon for African Americans, because you want to go with the hottest thing jumping, and when that inspiration is over, you're lost. But I knew that my initial outcome was an internal drive. So yeah.
I'd love to know what your internal voice is like, when you're in the midst of something which is challenging you, whether that's something in life, whether that's an Ironman. What's the internal voice saying to you?
Failure is not an option. It's not. If I'm going to fail at something, it won't be from the lack of trying. And because I don't come from a huge support system or a whole bunch of money or mom and dad to fall back on, every moment, every day, every opportunity to better myself and learn and think outside the box and become vulnerable and strengthen my weaknesses and strengthen my strengths, it's not an option. Failure is just not an option.
Have you always been that positive?
No. Going into college, yes. Growing up, no, because I struggled a lot. I'm the oldest of 8, although my mom only had 2. So it was me and my sister. But, my grandmother raised me, is what I'm saying. My mom wasn't there. Dad wasn't there. And I grew up where my grandmother was my security blanket. And so that means that she was everything. She was the rock, but she wasn't just a rock for me. She was the rock to her 12 kids and then her grandkids and then their kids. And so when everyone else was going home with their parents, I was still at grandmom's house, right? And where everyone else was getting original clothes and X, Y, and Z, I was getting hand-me-downs. So for me, it was always trying to come from underneath someone or underneath a stigma that I was kind of born into that was unfair. And I kind of had an attitude about it growing up. Like, why wasn't my mom there? Why wasn't my dad there? Why this? And I remember my uncle saying to me, you're going to be barefoot and pregnant before you're 10. And I'm thinking, like, how do you make babies, right? So I'm not even having sex. And I'm thinking, like, why, I kind of inherited an attitude is what I'm trying to say. And then I remember having these conversations with a higher power I wasn't 100% believing in just yet. And I was like, look, this isn't fair. This is crap. Like, I realized my attitude was kind of impeding success. And then one day I kind of let it go. And I was just like, well, okay, if no one's going to hand it to me, I'm going to kind of go for it. And then the breaking point for me is when my grandmother used to hit the lottery a lot, Sarah, and my family members used to steal from her. And then I saw her struggle. And I didn't want to be that person that contribute to her demise when knowing she was doing the best for us. So I kind of took it into my own hands and I started working at 11, 12. So my mindset was, I'm the underdog. There isn't a whole group of people that's going to be there supportive. If it's something that I wanted, I kind of had to put my eye on it and go after it. And failure wasn't an option.
Absolutely. Tell me more about starting the International Association of Black Triathletes. How did that come about?
I was one of the co-founders. So the IABT was actually a Facebook social group identified as Black Triathletes, started by someone else. And then that person also sat on the board of directors for Endurance nonprofit. So after, I guess, like 2 years, I'm assuming like 2 years because it started in 2012 and I did my first Ironman in 2014. She wanted to kind of step off. So she was kind of recruiting people to a committee to kind of take on this new leadership within a group. And outside of all of that, she stepped off. IBT was formed, and then we were a co-board of 4, those 3 in Texas, me in Maryland. And, everyone is enjoying something for different reasons. After a while, their interest fell off, and I'm like, okay, I'll take it over, because I started seeing the positive of what it could do. And why IBT initially was formed, I believe the social group was just to get African Americans within the sport under one umbrella. But what we started to see, sir, was the inadequacies and inequalities going on within the sport. There were a lot of African Americans that were jumping into the sport, but had a high level of DQs or do not start or do not finish. They were unsure, and there really wasn't a hub to kind of advocate for the African Americans in the sport. Also, the other reason that really kind of fell alongside was when Ironman Foundation started the Women for Tri board. And we thought that this would be not only, a great opportunity to kind of shift the focus from a social group into an organizing group to kind of stand for a mission and a vision, but we were hoping that there would have been some kind of representation from minorities inside the sport and these leadership organizations, and it wasn't. And so I took over president or executive director of president of IBT. At that point, it wasn't, in 2014, it wasn't a nonprofit. People started stepping off. I kind of changed it into a nonprofit, and then the rest is history.
Yeah. What was your vision for it? Did you have the end vision in mind of what you hoped to achieve?
Initially, Sarah, I didn't. And that was part of the frustration. So I kind of had, the multi-sport industry was completely new, right, for me. So I had only been on the athlete side for like 2 years, even though I come from the running side, plenty of races, cycling. But the multi-sport industry was intriguing. And so I really didn't have a sense of the industry, but I have business sense because I come from an award-winning consultant business and, working with school systems and leadership and development, all of that. So at first I couldn't get my hands on how to navigate and what it would look like. The other part that was kind of frustrating at first is that they were all of these other organizations that were popping up to represent adult African Americans. And so it felt like we were kind of competing, and eventually I had to stop and I had to think like, okay, what is my niche, right? Because now we're getting outside of the industry and just getting into business sense. Well, lo and behold, my niche was sitting right in front of me. What do you mean? What do I mean? When I was training for Ironman Maryland, I'm a mom, as you mentioned before, of 4 kids. 3 of them were all elementary, and I did not realize how much they were watching me. Like, they had been to my marathons and running, so they knew that part of mine. We were running family, we would get out on the bike and cycle. But here they're seeing me swim, overcoming in swimming, cycling, getting on a trainer, running, and I'm tired, balancing as a single mom, X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden, Ironman Maryland was in September 2014, and not even 2 weeks after that, Sarah. And so right at the time they started asking me was the time that this transition from the social group into an organization was all going at the same time. So they said to me, they was like, we want to be a triathlete. We want to do triathlons like you, Mom. And I was like, what? So even though I come from coaching, 2 decades in coaching on various level, and I wasn't a certified tri coach. I wasn't a swim coach. So I was like, okay, I put my kids in swim lessons, and, it became too expensive. So I was like, okay, let me get them in a pool and teach them what I learned. Right. And so then from there, I became swim certified and tried and all of that. So long story short, to answer your question, initially I wasn't sure, and I knew that every organization in the industry could not represent the same population. The more I started learning and hearing, so at this point I had to become a student of the industry to kind of learn and to navigate and to watch and observe. And then I had the greatest inspiration under my household. So I started training my youth, started, applying the skill sets that I knew from swimming. We were already running and cycling, and they went, they started doing their first try in 2015, and they went to I believe it was maybe their first race, youth race, not my race. And they said, where are the kids that look like us? Well, baby, that's what the industry looked like. So they were like, after like the third event in, we want other kids that look like us. I said, well, what do you want to do about it? They said, well, I said, well, what do you think about starting a club? And it was like, okay. I said, well, what would you want to do? They said, we want to get other kids involved in a sport that look like us. So IABT's niche now became youth. And then from the IABT Junior Multi-Sport Club, we attached it to causes such as overcoming childhood obesity. We did a 3-year campaign on that. And then it within that campaign of childhood obesity, we added adult obesity. Then that whole family unit came in. Then we connected it to cancer. And then that's when USAT came out with their initiative with wanting to have a focus on youth. And so right as we were transitioning, or at least having that grassroots initiative and focus, we fell right in alignment with a void inside of USAT. And we had an opportunity to penetrate in the urban community because that was our focal point. And then the rest is history.
How old are your kids?
They are currently 12, 14, 15, and soon to be 23 in 2 weeks. But when they all started, my youngest was 5, 7, and 8.
Has it been easy to get more of the youth involved?
It didn't take off right away because people lack knowledge. They lack introduction. They lack seeing the sport. They lack educating of the sport. So automatically being able to recruit youth right off the bat was not easy. My kids became the advocates, and not just voice in the sport, but also in reflection of those that we were attracting, right? Or trying to attract. But what I had to do in learning the culture of urban communities was to tie the sport to something beyond sports, right? And that's creating a buy-in. So for most urban families, unlike rural and suburban families, what's in it for my kid beyond swimming? Because they can go join a swim team if it's about that. What's in it for my kid beyond running? Because they can go do cross country or track and field. And then also in urban communities, you didn't have a lot of kids that were riding bicycles with a helmet in races. So we're not bringing single discipline, we're bringing a tri sport. So it was really trying to help people understand and navigate, one, what the sport was, two, what the industry is, three, the untapped potential, and then we literally had to tie it to something that was more meaningful outside of those things. It sounded good, but what did it look like? So from there, we started partnering with a throughout 3-year campaign of overcoming childhood obesity. And as you may be familiar with, in urban communities, there are a lot of deaths associated with obesity, right? Health disparities. So that was something that was easy. And we were trying to get people to think not in terms of a sport and a medal, but longevity of life. What can cross training and swimming do? What could, cycling do? What could getting out, walk, running do for longevity of life? And then the building of family values. And so it started catching the momentum a little. And then from there, I became a certified race director along the way. And then we held the first event. So it wasn't just enough to tie it to a cause, because one of the downfalls is that people still didn't realize what a triathlon looked like. And what I tell most people, Sarah, is that watching a triathlon on a video is very opposite of what it looks like in the real world, right?
Yeah.
So it's so amazing. And so it started garnering traction, because it wasn't just about saying it, it was about doing it, education, and people seeing it. And then from there, we were able to actually, it piqued the interest of our local news media and newspapers. And then after like 2 years, Sarah, I decided to go big or go home, right? And what I mean by that is that we had already had the overcoming childhood obesity. We had tied it to having events in our community, all inaugural things, right? We were getting citations by the mayor, the governor in the state of Maryland was on board, because we were doing things in our community that wasn't being done in our surrounding states. Then we, learning the industry a little more and understanding that there was no other model from which to replicate. We were the replication. We were the model. So I created the IABT, what's the name of the conference? I don't know. I got to look it up.
Junior Tri Conference, Multisport
Yes.
Racing Youth and Junior Tri Conference.
Yes. We didn't have it this year because it was pushed back. So so in 2018, which we're now 3 years going into the third year, we went big. I was like, and I noticed, because now I'm going outside of the industry, to understand that when you host a conference, that means you're serious. Right? But it wasn't just about that, sir. At this point, for 2 years now, going into 3 years, I was having to individually have these conversations with people. Mayor's office, athletic directors, school systems, coaches, rec centers, recs and parks. And it became too much. I was one person, no other coaches around me, not too many triathletes, no one. And if there were triathletes, like in DC, their focus weren't urban youth. So it was this uphill battle. So I went back to my consultant roots and partnered with Morgan State Community Mile. I had a really good friend that still works there. And I said, listen, I want to have this conference, X, Y, and Z. They already knew my history, already had done groundbreaking grassroots initiatives. So they had been following me along the way. And we held the first Youth and Junior Tri Conference. And so that really opened the door, because most tri conferences, Sarah, as you know, are only targeted towards adults. And so here we are at this point, we're really on a map. And so that was exciting, because what we were doing, it was just using a sport to really take it all the way up to the collegiate level. And so that was the connection that I was trying to present by partnering with Morgan State. So I knew the pathway from as young as 5 all the way up to 18. So I started doing the groundwork as a coach. The disconnect for me was solidifying our club and helping them to develop from youth and junior to youth and junior elite onto high school. At that point, it really stopped. And to understand the dynamics of an urban community, you also have to understand with the positive come barriers. And, it's not just the transportation, it's not just the finances, Sarah. It's not just single moms working 2 to 3 jobs, youth high unemployment, living below the poverty level. But a lot of our students are not college bound, right? Here was an opportunity with what I was trying to get parents to understand. I wanted them to understand where this pathway led, because in our industry, even as of the recording of this podcast, there are only two African American females that's racing on an NCAA level. Last fall, it was three, two stopped, one remained, and one just got signed on in East Tennessee State. For an urban kid, and I use the word urban and not black, and I'm going to talk about that distinguish in a minute, but especially for a black female, to grow up through the sport, to understand the sport, to race on all levels. And we also take our kids to youth and junior nationals, which is just now youth and junior, that can swim in open water. Sarah, it's almost a guaranteed pathway to college to race because they're black. So for those kids who may not have been able to dream about college for academics, here comes another opportunity, which will also strengthen the academic part. So you have two possible pathways to hit college. So when I say untapped potential, untapped opportunity, the sport of triathlon in urban communities in and through IABT is a wide open playground to help people understand the full potential of the sport.
You've put in, the amount of work and effort and passion that would have gone into creating what you've created blows my mind. How have you managed stress, or how have you dealt with the stress of, trying to pull off this massive vision, this dream that you've got and what you want to achieve?
I'll take it back into when I first started running and first started swimming. In my eyes, it's not massive because, again, you have to set SMART goals, right? So first and foremost, those kids that I'm advocating for, Sarah, you're talking to her. I'm that kid from the hood, West Baltimore, didn't grow up with a lot of money. Sports wasn't an option, didn't understand sports. Grandmother raised her, mom was absent, dad was nowhere, right? Hand-me-downs, had to fight my way from the bottom up, that underdog, right? My school counselor told me that I should never apply to college because I was only worthy of McDonald's, right? Growing up in the 80s and the late 70s and the 90s is nowhere near the headache that these kids in the 21st century are running into. We didn't have social media. We didn't have all of this, right? Our generation was more of the values and things like that, where everything with this generation is quick pro quo, right? They elitist, you owe me this, where when I grew up, you had to earn it, right? And so when I think of the current state of youth inner city or urban areas who don't necessarily have that village around them the way we did growing up, they're in trouble, right? And when I think of the long-term vision as to what we currently see in the White House and in Congress and, what's going on in the world, what's missing, Sarah, is substance. And that substance is replicated that I see every day in my house because they're my kids, right? My kids started in this sport 5 years ago, really 6 years ago in elementary school. Now, they had both parents at one point, but I'm a single mom. So when I get tired, and I have had those days when I do run up against brick walls, but it's okay because I've been running up against brick walls way before I found the sport of triathlon or this industry, I pause, take a break. Running is still my outlet. Swimming is my outlet. Going to the gym is my outlet. Shutting everything down remains my outlet. And my kids have learned to know, understand, and respect that. If mom is on a couch, leave mom alone. Now, I can hear each other saying, be quiet, mom's asleep, right? Because they see the work. But as we know, as educators, we set out to teach, but we end up learning. So when my kids in 2014 said, Mom, we want to be like you, and do triathlons, I set out to teach them, but I became a student because I really hadn't seen youth aspire through the sport, right? I've only seen adults, and I knew what my initial goals were, or my initial motivation, which is the fact that I'm an underdog. To me, it's not going to be handed to me. For me, if I want it, I got to work for it. So outside of me having to take time for self, and up until this spring, even now, most of my nonprofit efforts have been paid out of my pocket, right? With little grants here and there, but I knew that I had to keep going. But I became a student of my targeted audience, because you could take a kid who appeared useless or not as well versed to someone else, and put them in a position of training for a triathlon and swimming and cycling and running, or just swimming by itself, or getting on that bike, or overcoming their fears and adversity, and then see them in action. And it's a whole different kid, right? And that's the breakthrough. It's not the outcome, it's the process. So every time I think, not as an adult, every time I think of that kid that may be missing out, or sitting on the sideline, or not being picked, or being told that they can't amount to nothing, and no one wants to be friends with them. Again, that's me, right? That was once me. I'm saying, bring me that kid, because I can get to any kid. I'm not talking about yelling or shouting and none of that, but kids have more potential. And if they can believe that as a youth, can you imagine how wonderful they're going to be as adults? And as they grow in school and take that confidence and that self-awareness and that innate skill set that they've learned through the sport, and transfer it into academics and socials and relationship and career and college and all of that, we're changing the narrative. We're changing poverty levels. We're changing family dynamics. We're changing outlook on the world, and we're really changing how they view themselves. It's not tough. I mean, it is tough. It's not easy, but it's worth it. We focus on youth, but we indirectly impact families. And how is that? Because again, in urban communities, Sarah, triathlon is a taboo, right? So we got to approach these parents and say, hey, bring your kid over here. Don't sign Johnny or Joan up for track and field or football, where they could go to practice every day, but they may never take part in a sport. And say, bring them over here. We're not only going to teach them how to swim, we're not only going to teach them how to ride a bike, we're not only going to teach them how to navigate and understand and educate them in the sport of running, nutrition, transition, but we're going to allow you to see something that you don't even know about your kid yet, right? Then we tie it to academics and college and career readiness. So while we're teaching the youth, the parents are learning, because IABT's motto is, unlike single discipline sports, you can't drop your kids off and leave. Come on over here. Because now IABT is fighting health disparities. Come get in the water, come cycle, come do this joint event, mom and me, or dad, or whatever the case, because now it's family bonding. Because if we're only providing training 2 out of 7 days, if there's no reinforcement from home, Sarah, by the time we see that kid a week later, we're starting all over again. We don't have time for that, right? We need you, mom and dad, to take Johnny and Jane and Sue and everybody else to the pool, and get out on the bike, and take them to the track, and focus on nutrition and hydration and all of those things. So the family unit, just like in education, is a key component to our success, and vice versa. So you're right. And in every level that we've been able to break through, even here in 2020, it's still not enough, because there's still more to be done. But I will say this, is that one thing in the industry that I always hear is, where are the youth or the kids that grow with the sport, right? And you don't find many of them, and especially not in the urban community. And I keep saying, you asking a question, but here's the person right here who can tell you that, who can demonstrate it.
it's really interesting because so many things are interconnected, exactly as you say, with the youth into the family and everything else. I'd love to know, what is a typical week like in your house?
Oh, wow. Let's see. Time management and organization is everything. And I've known that even before the sport, that's been a key factor in my house because in my family is God, education, everything else, right? For my kids, if I have to get you up in the morning for school, we got problems because that's not my job because your job is school. So my kids were on a schedule, right? And that schedule is important. Consistency is important and things like that. And that's it for me as a parent and as a coach, that was easy to transition into the sport of triathlon because we were on a structured schedule as much as possible. And at some point, as a parent and a coach, I didn't need to keep reinforcing it because the athletes, the students themselves started learning, hey, I can't serve two evils is what I call it, right? You can't be up at 11 o'clock at night and then having to get up at 5 a.m. to leave out for a triathlon or training. Your body is going to force you to choose one or the other, right? And also with nutrition, you can eat, first and foremost in my family, if we go to the dentist and you got a cavity, we got a problem because cavity leads to far greater things than just a sport. So my kids are conscientious about that, right? So even eating or drinking sodas and, going out to run or X, Y, and Z, I don't want to hear excuses because you had to train. So they kind of have taken on that accountability as athletes and as students that kind of help my job to make it easier. So our nonprofit is their business, right? So they were learning the setting up and breaking down of events. They learned how to stuff swag bags and create swag bags and things like that. So but it also kind of helped with teamwork and communication and leadership and, just learning the aspects of life. So time management and organization is everything.
Where can people find more information about you? Where can you find more information out about the IABT? Where's the best place to go?
People can find more about IABT at www.theibt.org. They can email us at iabttriathletes@gmail.com. They can give us a call at 443-267-8783. I'm actually launching a cohort of individuals that are interested in starting grassroots initiatives in their communities, regardless of skin color, regardless of ethnic background, because in hindsight, a non-minority person can go into an urban community and start a grassroots initiative, right? What lacks is how to navigate. So after years of not just growing up in an urban community and navigating other initiatives outside of the sport, but mainly in the sport, I am a person that can help. So I am launching I got about 10 to 12 people right now that I'm working with or beginning to work with. But if someone is interested in launching or growing or expanding their minority base or grassroots initiative, they can reach out to me.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Tekemia Dorsey, you are doing incredible work for the youth, for the community, for the level of support that you are putting out there. You're making such fundamental changes, which are going to have knock-on consequences. Absolutely inspiring. As we talked about, I will add all of the links to everything that we've talked about to the International Association of Black Triathletes and to the websites that they can follow along so they can support. But thank you so much for giving up your time to come on the Tough Girl podcast and share more.
Thank you. And I appreciate the focus just being on the impact of the sport and the positive or not outcomes as a result, as opposed to it being a race-related discussion, because the sport is very powerful. And I appreciate the opportunity to not just share my story, but the positive impact that IABT has had in our community, with hopes that others will become inspired themselves and start a movement in their community as well, because there are a lot of kids, Sarah, and a lot of family, but definitely a lot of kids that need outlets. And this sport is it.
Absolutely. And it's life-changing at the end of the day. It will change their life.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening to that episode with Dr. Tekemia Dorsey, one absolute legend. My name is Sarah Williams. I'm the host of the Tough Girl podcast and the founder of Tough Girl Challenges. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. So please do go and check out the main website. Toughgirlchallenges.com is basically like the main central hub. It gives you more information about me, my background, the books that I've written, as well as more information about our previous guests. New episodes of the Tough Girl podcast come out on a Tuesday at 7 a.m. UK time. And next Tuesday, the 8th of September, we're going to be speaking with Kristen Knight-Pace, who is going to be sharing more about finishing the 2015 Yukon Quest 1,000-mile sled dog race. Kristen's also going to be sharing more about her journey and how she did get into dog mushing. So it all started in 2009 after a crippling divorce that left her heartbroken and directionless. Kristen decided to accept an offer to live at a friend's cabin outside of Denali National Park in Alaska for a few months. In exchange for housing, she would take care of her friend's 8 sled dogs. That winter, she learned that she was tougher than she ever knew. She learned how to survive in one of the most remote places on earth, and she learned that she was strong enough to be alone. She also fell in love twice, first with running sled dogs and then with Andy, a gentleman who had himself moved to Alaska to heal a broken heart. So this episode is absolutely inspiring. There's a love story, there's action, there is adventure. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. Just want to say a massive thank you to all of the incredible donations which have been coming in via PayPal. I really do appreciate it. I just want to give a shout out to Sarah Tudhope, Catherine Cheek, Megan Owen, Joan Schilling, Victoria Royal, Claire Eddington, Anna Price, Kelly Hodge, Bhakti Pandya, and Mrs. F. Thank you so much for going onto the website, scrolling down, finding that PayPal button and hitting donate. It really does make a massive difference. The Tough Girl podcast is supported by the incredible patrons around the world. If you go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast, there has been a few changes in Patreon as well at the moment. So previously you were only able to donate in US dollars, and that's because it's a US company. Since then, they've gone on to make some changes, and those changes are that you now have 3 options when you donate. So you can either choose to donate in sterling, US dollars or euro, and there is also an annual membership option as well. So if you don't want to pay monthly and you maybe just want to do a donation for once a year, then that would be absolutely amazing. So please do go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast, and figure out what's best for you. How can you support the podcast? How can you pay it forward? How can you get involved with the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media? New episodes every Tuesday and every Thursday. Hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and any feedback, then please don't hesitate to reach out, sarah@toughgirlchallenges.com. But wherever you are, whatever you are doing, have an awesome week. Give it your all, give it 110%. Get after it, go for it. You've got one life, so live it. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.